Exploring the Birds of Ontario with David T. Chapman. First, we're going to start off with the blue jay, a very loud bird, especially if you haven't left your peanuts out for it. It will let you know, and tends to be the bossy ones of the feeder as well, where they will kind of kick other birds off, like common grackles will, and that too. But they also alarm other birds about maybe a predator being in the area too. So it's kind of a bit of a trade-off when it comes to that. Then we have the common redpoll. The common redpoll comes down from the tundra, and they'll often feed on birch as well as grass, and at your feeders they like Niger seed. And of course we have the robin. The robin is one where it's almost like the official welcome back to spring, even though technically the red-winged blackbird is the one that we typically see when the spring weather comes back. The robin still is that song. You wait for it to hear that song in the early hours of the morning. Then we have the cowbird here. This is the male cowbird, and you can see the female as well. They're a parasitic bird where she lays her eggs in another bird's nest and lets them raise them basically. Then we have the black cap chickadee, cute little thing, often one that we will hear do their little chickadee dee dee in the background. But there's also the boreal chickadee as well too, that can be found in Algonquin and northern parts of Canada in the boreal forest. And the white-winged crossbill. The white-winged crossbill can be pretty neat to see. There's the male there, where basically they hang upside down while they are feeding and get into the pine cones that way. And then the cedar waxwing, which looks a lot like a bandit here, is another bird. And I kind of call them a love bird because you often see them kind of in these cases where the male is feeding the female. And it's to show that he will both feed her at the nest as well as look after the young too. And this is when I feel kind of like the paparazzi of birds then. And you can see here the northern oriole. Northern oriole, very brilliant bird, will come to eat orange halves at your feeders, and they build these nests that hang. It's like a hanging basket, and like you can see here, and they're the easiest to find generally in the fall when the leaves are off the tree, or throughout the winter as well too. Then we have the brilliant American goldfinch. That was the male, and here's the female in the apple blossoms. And they blend in quite well when it comes to, there's actually two in this picture, and they blend in quite well when next to sunflowers. Then we have the gray jay. As you can see, the gray jay does like its ham and does like a bread, but it does prefer the ham instead because of the fact that it's so far north and they're cold, and that they burn off a lot of energy, so that fattiness really does help them out. Bird baths are a great way to have them come to your yard, and or any water basically. These birds that actually tend to find food easier in the warmer season, but not so much the water can be difficult, especially in the warm summer days. Then we have the male cardinal, and here's the male and the female together, and it was interesting to see her kind of bossing him around at times. And then the young one here, you can actually see Papa and little one, and neat to see them. And when the fledgling leaves, they can eventually fly with more ease. You can see the feathers start to come in, although it's a bit patchy. This male here is starting to show its signs later in the summer of the beautiful color it's going to be. And then the partial albino, and there's a great example of them both in their prime. That's the female to the left and the male to the right. We have the red-winged blackbird. The red-winged blackbird is one that you often see around ponds, marshes, and even the side of roads now too. And then the common grackle, you can see quite a bit of color on this one compared to what you see in some kind of the gray sky days. So if you get the sun at the right angle, you can get some very brilliant colors. And then the immature version, which only maybe a face only a mother could love, but a beautiful, still a beautiful bird, just kind of has its own character. And then the ruby-throated hummingbird female that you saw there, along with the male downy. You can see that red patch behind his head. And they are the smallest woodpecker in eastern North America. And you can see the immature there as well too, with a bit more spotted, pale spotted pattern on the chest. Mourning doves can have up to 5 to 6 broods of young, so they're kind of what I call the rabbit of the bird world. And the house finch. The house finch was one that was basically, it became illegal in the eastern U.S. to have them. So instead of killing the birds and that, the people just freed them and they established themselves in eastern North America. And then of course we have the aggressive house sparrow, which is part of the reason why we need the Eastern Bluebird Box program now, because they are so aggressive that they are taking out a lot of the native species. And then the northern mockingbird. The northern mockingbird, you can see the male there, and here's again one of the immatures with you can see the spotted flecks on the chest there. Not too common to get the white-breasted nuthatch sleeping, or many birds sleeping during the day, but that was one of those times. And you can see the fall colors blazing in the background and how they walk on the tree. They can go upside down all around the branch and basically hang there, which is pretty neat to watch as well too. And they feed, they take their bill and feed in the cracks of the bark, and that's often how they will find their food. So we move on to the park here. A great location to experience songbirds is at a feeder. The feeders tend to help bring in many, many birds, like the northern cardinal here. And one of the spots I go to is Dufferin Islands, but you can often find them in parks around your area as well, and it gives you an opportunity to really see them nice and close, where basically you can have them right in your hand, and you'll get to see some examples of that here shortly. This is the Tufted Tit Mouse, and you can see this is the funny part here with the chickadee. The chickadee comes in and basically is so used to being fed by people that it actually came and hit my camera phone at that point, so it was kind of neat to experience that. This was a warbler that you typically don't see in Canada during the month of February, but because there was an abundance of food, the pine warbler, both male and female, stayed at the Dufferin Islands Park. So this is all from my phone, so it gives you an idea of what you can experience as well up close in these parks and areas where there's feeders, and even in your own backyard if the birds get used to you. So you have the male cardinal right here, and it's zoomed in a little bit, but this is where the experience really got grand for me as well. So this is the female downy woodpecker, and you can see she's deciding whether or not she wants to come in for some food. And so she comes in and methodically checks, oh, maybe it's this peanut, oh, maybe not, oh, okay, yeah, I think I'm going to go with this one. So that was neat to have her come in, because it was the first time I'd had a woodpecker in my hand. And then other various species came around as well too. The black cap chickadee is typically the one that most people get to feed out of their hands very early on in their life. So that's kind of a neat one, and you'll see kind of a reoccurring theme. Now as for the pine warbler there, though, you can see she was trying to get over to me. There's the red-breasted nuthatch, very quickly in and out. But you can see that she was basically wanting to get in there but couldn't. And that was what I discovered to be something where she wasn't confident in her landing. So that was one that plagued her, as well as the Cardinal Mail here. You can see the Cardinal Mail basically, I'm holding it out, hoping that he'll come in, and you can see he's not afraid of me. He's just unconfident in the way of coming up. I even tried to move my hand over to closer to the limb so that he could basically feed right out of it. So anyways, you can see again there's the female pine warbler, and then very quickly here you'll see the tufted tit mouse make up its mind here and come in for some food. Should be any moment here now. You'll see right there, and in and out. So very decisive, knew what it wanted and left, unlike the female downy woodpecker earlier. So now we're back to my main lens here, and you can see the female pine warbler feeding on the ground, as well as the tufted tit mouse going away with its goodies as well. So that's kind of the neat things that you can see with it. Another thing with the tufted tit mouse, you can see putting his foot right up into his feathers there, just warming it up basically, because the winter storm was coming in. And then, yeah, the male cardinal, by far, if you want to draw them to your yard, your best seed is generally sunflower. And this is a partial albino northern cardinal that you can see here. A very beautiful bird. And then the reason why I was actually there was because of this painted bunting, which tends to be more middle of the U.S. and in the month of January and February it should be down in the middle, the tropics basically. And this particular time it was right up in Mississauga. And then there's the Indigo Bunting. So this is one that we typically see more of in our province of Ontario and Eastern Canada. And it's a beautiful bird. A lot of people call it the blue bird, and not because of the fact it is so blue, but it is more of an indigo color. And what's neat about them is they often feed and sing at the same time, because it can be quite competitive in a nesting area. This is Kinsmen Park, south of Beamsville in the Niagara Escarpment, and I've seen as many as 6 to 8 males there, all feeding and singing and competing over the same area there. And you may have saw some droppings there with the Indigo Bunting. Typically, that kind of tells me that the songbird is about to fly away, hence the slow motion there, and you can see him leave. Then there's the gray catbird, which they do mimic the sound of a cat, and it very much does sound like there is a cat in the woods there, but you can see it feeding on some sumac. Now when it comes to robins, right in the center of your screen there, you can see a bit of a bill there, and that is a youngster. So the reason why I like to have robins is because of the fact that it's a bird that we typically get to see in our yards, and have a good chance of seeing them nest there as well, because there is so many of them. They can have up to 3 broods in one season, although they do typically change nesting areas. And you notice here that the robin has actually got its bill open. It was a very hot day, so that is their way of regulating their body temperature. And there's the youngster here. So this is a fledgling, just left the nest a couple days ago. And you can see it stretching out, still getting used to being out on its own. And very clumsy, you'll see that here, and then it takes off here as well too. And this is one of the funny experiences with it, where basically I got to experience how kind of it's like the under the pillow effect. If you tuck your head under the pillow, if you can't see it, they can't see you, so it's kind of that hiding technique. And you'll see me walk out in front of the camera here very shortly, and you'll see it kind of straighten itself up as it knows that I'm behind it, because it's going by hearing at this point. And you can see it straighten itself up. It would have actually been better off just standing there still, because it blends in so well, but movement draws the attention of a predator. And you can see when your bones are hollow and your feathers are actually 3 times heavier than your skeleton, even the leaves can actually push you around a fair bit as well too. And that's one of the parents there basically going to feed one of the young, and you can see quite satisfied at that point. Other birds that also grace the yards is the female house finch here, and you can see she's missing some feathers there. It's a good chance she either collided with something, or even maybe a hawk of some sort, usually the Cooper's hawk, that can take the feathers away from the bird in a close call, because that's what they hunt. Songbirds basically use our feeders as almost like a fast food restaurant, really. So then we have the gray jays. These are up in Algonquin Park and northern parts of Canada overall, also known as the Whiskey Jack or Canada jay. They are a beautiful, curious bird, and you can see that gray and white plumage, and they can start nesting as early as February and early March, which does give you an idea on how they basically they have their feathers are so well entwined that they can stay warm even in those temperatures and even incubate eggs. So that's one of the neat things when it comes to the gray jay, is the fact that they can start so early, almost like owls basically, because some of them start nesting as early as January, but mainly in February. So one of the funny things about this was the fact that when we went there, we only had bread and at the first time, and some other person brought meat, and needless to say, the meat was what they wanted, so we brought meat the next time because it did draw them in more, and then they cached that away. Now, you're probably used to blue jays being the bosses at your feeders. Well, in this case up north, it's the gray jay that rules the roost. So now we're taking a look at a murmuration, and this is basically thousands of European starlings that have flocked together, and you can see them swarming. Now, the reason why they're doing this is there's actually some birds of prey in there, and you'll be able to see them, the larger images here, once they get a little bit closer. So this is often what you would see typically in the evening, where a flock of European starlings will stop, and they may be feeding together, and then all of a sudden they all take off together and they do this tremendous spectacular flight, and it's called a murmuration. Now in this case, what you're looking at is actually a predator thing, where it's a defense mechanism against these predators are trying to get them, which is a red-tailed hawk at this point. There was actually several red-tailed hawks working on this flock, and yet they were having no success. So you'll see here they continue their flight. So it's beautiful to watch. It was my first time ever seeing it. And there's a great example of the red-tailed hawk at the back chasing this group of European starlings. So as it continues to fly, you can actually see it's not getting any closer. And a number of the European starlings have actually branched away from the smaller group that is still being pursued by the red-tailed hawk. And you can see right here, the red-tailed hawk is just not able to get close enough to actually catch its prey. So from what I saw, the red-tailed hawks went hungry, and this is more of what a murmuration would look. You can see the quick darts, the turning and movement in it, and that generally happens in the fall and winter is when you'll see that before they break up again in the spring. Now, when it comes to storms and how they affect migration, even in the Great Lakes here, when you have a cold front coming through, it can actually put a real damper on the migration northward. So you can actually get these fallouts that take place where you have hundreds or thousands of birds that all have to stay in one spot. So let's say you have a warm front that is cutting through the Toronto area. So on the south side of that, you have southerly winds that are crossing the lake, but maybe right where the warm front is, you have a northeasterly wind or a north wind, and because of it being a headwind, that actually causes more stress on the bird because they're already stressed out from their long flight as it is. So when you have that wind coming from the north, what will happen is it'll push them down to the surface, and then they'll land on the trees and feed in an area, and that's where you can get many different species, along with also many other just lots of different birds of predator or prey, and that basically add up to just many birds in one area. So it's really neat to see that. Now what you're looking at there was turkey vultures, and that was on the reverse migration, and you can see when the weather pushes them down, they'll hold out their wings and it dries off as well too. There's what looks like a three-winged turkey vulture. But as you can see, we're going to go through the birds of prey now, and this is the osprey, which primarily feeds on fish, but they will go after some small mammals when food is short. And then there's the bald eagle, which many of us have seen, and numbers are increasing again in Ontario, which is a very good thing, especially along the shorelines. You can sometimes see, I've seen reports up by Kincardine, the Bruce nuclear plant there, of over 60. And Lake Erie is a great spot, as well as the Niagara River, and even following the Grand River as well, you can see them there too. This is the northern harrier. These are the females, and you can see them kind of diving there, and they're basically competing over food, but they are in the same family. And then sometimes you'll get short-eared owls and northern harriers that compete for food too. Usually it's the short-eared owl that comes out on the short end of the stick. You can actually see a lemming flying through the air, which is your kind of your rodents basically, and then the northern harrier goes after it. And neither of them got it because I saw them both hunting after it. Then you've got the Cooper's hawk. So you just saw the male, and there's the female Cooper's hawk. The broadwing hawk is a neat hawk that you often get to see in the spring and especially in the fall in these massive groups that often are in thermals of warm air rising, and you can see hundreds, even thousands in them at times. And then we have the red-tailed hawk. The red-tailed hawk is the one that you're likely to see the most. I find I'd say about every 10 hawks that I see, it's probably about 80 to 90% of them are the red-tailed hawk. And you can see here, this one is playing a little bit of hide and seek on me as it looks to almost completely remove its head. So very flexible when it comes to that. Then we have the rough-legged hawk. The rough-legged hawk is one of the largest, and they come down from the tundra. And there's also dark morph versions of it, as well as the red-tailed hawk. The American kestrel is one of the smallest. It is actually the smallest, where it's the smallest falcon, smallest hawk basically in North America, and you can see it has very beautiful colorful plumage that actually blends in quite well when it comes to its surroundings. And hawks will actually basically hawk insects, as you can see here, where they basically catch them in the air. And also There are birds that cause trouble for other birds, like the Peregrine Falcon here chasing the crow, and then short-eared owl. What I figured happened in this case was the fact that the Peregrine Falcon went into an area where the short-eared owls were roosting for the night, and when they were roosting, or for roosting for the day, and basically spook them out, and then the crows, anytime there's an altercation, the crows have to get in on it as well too. Then we have the Sandhill Crane, which is one of the more prehistoric birds, and then the great Egret here as well too, all white plumage that you can see in the Windsor area quite commonly, and the Niagara region. Point Pelee is an excellent zone to be in for that Amherstburg. Then the birds, this kind of shows you how light they are with this American Goldfinch. And you can see it's basically right on the grass there, and the advantage to that is that it doesn't go right to the ground, making it possible that a predator could catch it. So that's one of the advantages to being really light. And then we have the blue-gray gnatcatcher here, which predominantly feeds on insects. As you can, they will basically go from limb to limb, hawking them down as well too. And then you have the great blue heron. This is the more common crane that you're going to see. They do stay here all winter as well. And some do. It's the fact that they are basically, if it's a milder winter, they will stay here all winter. But if it's a cold one, then there was one winter I did not see a heron in. So that was the winter of 13-14, and yeah, very, very cold. And then we have sandpipers, basically your shorebirds, and this is kind of a neat thing that you're going to get to see here, where the shorebirds here are basically ones that will feed on sand, soil along the beach and look for little invertebrate. And so you can see when the waves come in, they don't want to quite get wet, but what happens is when the water goes back out, it actually exposes the food. And so it allows them to dig down and basically continue to feed. But they don't quite want to get hit by the wave. Now, my suggestion for getting up close like I did here, because this is a phone video, and so there's no zoom on it at this point, and you're seeing them really close, really tight. And this one's kind of building up, oh, and then takes off. And or not takes off completely, but kind of runs away. So what I did was basically get in its path and then just stand in one spot and let them do their thing, and that allowed me to get these really close images with my phone. And I also had my other camera going as well too. Shorebirds often will flock together, so that can be your sandpipers, your Dunlin, also plovers that mix together, and that was taken along Lake Erie in the month of November, so it can still be quite late too. Of course, we have Canadian geese, or ones that may chase you away from their nest, and then we can get rafts of ducks and scoters as well, so paddling, a group of them all coming together here. And this is a neat clip here because you actually get to see how they swim underwater. You can see how it basically thrusted downwards as it continued. So I put in the slow motion here so you can see that take hold, and they just thrust themselves down with tremendous power. And the water was so clear that day, it allowed you to see all of that action take place. They have a gland behind their tail, which ducks and scoters have, so that when they're preening, it actually puts an oil over the feathers that makes them more waterproof. And here's the champion of all diving, and he's also the champion of just going straight through on the camera as well. But that's the long-tailed duck, and there's the female there as well, and then obviously you were looking at the drake. And they can actually dive up to 200 feet or around 60 to 65 meters. And that gives you an idea of just how far down they go, because that's challenging for anything or anyone. Then we have the bufflehead duck, or as I often like to call them, the bafflehead. You can see a little bit of that bobbing action that took place there. And then this is the red-breasted merganser, so very close relative to the basically common merganser and hooded merganser. And you can see a bit of a size difference there, where the scoter is larger than the merganser there. So a great spot to go is Bronte Harbor, or anywhere really along the Lake Ontario shoreline during the winter and early spring. This is taken in the month of March, and so you're getting a group of different ducks, like the greater scaup and lesser scaup ducks, the common goldeneye, all in one area. So at Bronte Harbor, you can get some really nice close views of them. There's the common golden eye going in the background because it has a very yellow eye and then kind of a circular patch of white near the on the head and the face area. Something neat that you're seeing here is that's the Redhead Duck, and then of course you have the male behind the female. But what you're going to see is what all this excitement is for. There's actually about 2 other males in pursuit here, which, you know, whenever you've got 1 female and 3 males, it's generally not going to be a good thing. And then you've got the common merganser. There's the male, and you can see him leading the way there. And then, of course, the redneck grebe. And they are quite spectacular when they basically put on a show of display in unison. It kind of is a territorial thing where they're displaying the fact that this is their area and they want it. It's kind of a dance. You can see how they're moving together, and it's an intimidating presence because they look bigger because they're working together so well. So I assume that this is it's definitely an immature redneck grebe, but you can actually see the 2. It could have been even one of the youngsters from the previous year. It's not going to be welcome in that area. Eventually the redhead male here and the female, they get to finally have some peace here as the crowds have thinned out of the other redhead ducks. And what I found impressive about the redneck grebe is the fact that they actually tend to even go after other ducks and clear them out as well too. So they are very territorial, and at times it even looks like they're going to turn on themselves as well too. So a neat thing to have, and Bronte Harbor is generally where a couple do nest every year. So it's a great location to visit in May and early June. And as usual, the long-tailed ducks going through at their rocket speed. And mute swans aren't native to this area, but they do nest now in southern Ontario in the Great Lakes region. And then you have the Tundra Swan, which has the yellow patch just in front of the eyeball there. It's a great way to see them. And what's neat about them is they actually have 25,200 feathers on average. Someone actually counted that in comparison to the ruby-throated hummingbird that has around 940. So it does give you an idea of the difference when it comes to that. Then we have the Trumpeter Swan, which they are recovering. Their populations had crashed quite a bit, but this one seems to be smiling. You can see the lack of the yellow patch in front of the eyeball there. But the mute swans are something that generally we have seen at parks and anywhere along the shoreline. And now we're going to start to get into the trouble for the ducks here, and that's the snowy owl. They will hunt waterfowl along the shoreline, especially when in the early part of winter. They tend to go after that until things start to freeze. But this little lady here actually is kind of comical because of the fact that she looks at me. She looks like she's getting all preened up and looking pretty for the camera. But instead what she does here is she'll actually fly off here, and you're going to see where she goes. You know what? Your camera time is basically over. I'm going to hide here, and you can't do anything about it, because if I wanted to get a photo of her completely clear now, I'd have to go into the lake to basically get it. So that was not going to happen. And now we move on to owls. This is the great horned owl. Generally, out of all the species, it's the one that I see the most, other than the snowy owl. But when it comes to nesting, they're the ones that I get to experience the most. I've seen as many as 9 of them in 1 year, basically 9 nests in the area where I was tracking them and seeing how the young were doing, which it was a very good year for them. And there's the owlets there, and the basically they get to start to fledge after it's about 30 some days before they leave the nest. And then of course this was actually my first owl shot, and you can see there it's actually taken using the town lights and that, and then of course the moonlight here to show the pupils of the snowy owl, and so you can see how large they are so that they can allow more light into it. And this is a time lapse that I did. Now obviously this is sped up, but over a course of a half an hour here you can see how many times it turns its head and how quick it looks, but in reality it's actually doing it, at a very reasonable pace. Snowy owls, though, they are really neat in the way that they lack pigment in their feathers, which actually allows air to get trapped, and therefore it acts as a great insulator. So therefore, you know, they can have no problem in temperatures of -40, -50, and still be, you know, quite comfortable. Whereas we may look at them and think, oh, you poor thing out there, must be freezing. And yet maybe in southern Ontario, it's only, you know, -2, -3 that day. And therefore, to us, it might be cold, but to them, it's really nothing. They have a tremendous flight pattern that when you look at them, you can actually see them go straight. They look where they're going, and that's often why sometimes, unfortunately, they get hit by cars or vehicles, because of the fact that they are so focused on exactly where they are going. And and if they fly low enough, of course, they could be hit by a vehicle. Then they also will compete. This is actually one larger snowy owl will come in. Generally, it's the female that is more aggressive, especially in the non-breeding season. So that's why you could see a little bit of a quarrel there, and the female did win. She basically booted the male out that had been in that area for about a year, or not a year and a half, but a month and a half. And then you have the female snowy there looking up at an airplane flying over, and this is a neat stance too, where the male is making himself look bigger. Then there's the barred owl, which has all black eyes, which kind of makes it look a little bit more spooky. It's more of the eerie owl out of them. And they will actually hunt other smaller owls as well too. The northern hawk owl is an interesting one. It does not hunt at night. It actually hunts during the day only. So it's one of the few owls that does that. And they have quite the hearing capability, but they can also spot prey up to a half a kilometer away. So their eyes are phenomenal when it comes to zeroing in on their target. Now, as for this character here, the interesting part about it is we had a group of photographers come in, and they went in right after it, and sure enough, it flew right in front of me and gave me a really beautiful photo just 12 feet away. It was spectacular. Then there's the eastern screech owl, which is one of the smaller owls. You can see here a version of the tan morph as well as the gray morph, which typically we see more of the gray morph in Canada or eastern Canada. And then we have the saw-whet owl, and I found them at Beamer Conservation. This was at Beamer Conservation as well as 50 Point, but generally along the lake shores is a good location because they have less kind of habitat to basically hide in, so it makes it easier to find them in the trees, especially during the winter months. And then we have the short-eared owls. They are often out at dawn and dusk. More commonly at dusk, I find, is when you'll see them hunting in the fields. And it's generally, you can get them right around sunset at times too, which does give you a little bit better lighting for viewing them, but typically it's about 15 minutes after, I find. And then you can see this one was a little bit surprised to see me, as its little tufts were up as well too, which are not actually ears, but they're just tufts that are just part of their plumage. Then you have the long-eared owl, which don't really have many clear shots of it yet. They, as you can tell, kind of get deeper into the pine there, but again, similar area to the saw-whet owls, where basically you can see them in the along the lake shores is where I found, or at least have seen the more reports of them. And then, of course, short-eared owls are neat in the way that they will flock together, especially during the winter and spring months. Early spring months, I should say, when we still actually have some snow, potentially. And you can see one flying in the background there, and then also one sitting on the fence post. And it is kind of neat to see them quarrel, because you can see this one takes off, and then that one goes after it too. So not only do they have to worry about northern harriers taking their food, but other siblings or other short-eared owls will also try to do the same thing too. So they do often compete very hard for food. And you can also recognize them by their flight pattern. So you can see kind of this upward butterfly pattern to this one's flight. And this is an example of how they hunt. So this is how I see them. Generally, my rule of thumb is if you have 90, or it's about 90% chance during the day it's a hawk of some sort. After the sun has went down in twilight, it's basically, I always say, about 90% chance it's a owl and not so much a hawk then. So that's how I kind of sort things out, but I still have to have 100% confirmation when it comes to that. So there you can see that's kind of a hunting technique where they basically fly over and then they dive right on down and swoop to get their prey. They often go to a favorite perch like this one has here. And what's kind of funny is this one here looks very similar to a burrowing owl in the sense that it's kind of very hyper, but you can understand why, because it doesn't want to become prey itself, as well as the fact that it doesn't want to lose its food. So it's even looking at me at times too, where it's like, oh, are you going to take it? And trust me, I think anyone that's listening to this is going to agree that we do not want what it's eating. So you can see it still has to keep an eye out. So it's probably looking for northern harriers or other family members, or of the same species at least. And you'll see it's kind of prepping the meal. They do swallow it whole. I did actually have that in my program at one time, but decided to take it out because I had a little girl in the crowd that asked if it was going to be okay. So I've taken out that process, but basically they tilt their head back and then they swallow the whole rodent whole, and then in a day or two they will regurgitate the bones and fur and that into a pellet, and that's how because they can't digest that, but they can bring it back up again. So as you can see here, the time of night shows you a great example, and we've got about 5 that are kind of on screen at the moment, and that shows you how many you can have in a group. I've had as many as 12 in one area at the same time, and you can see those 2 going through. So this is in the Niagara region, which is a great area. Haldimand's another good area for short-eared owls, and I'm getting a few more reports in the flats of kind of like just kind of the flats of Arthur and that area as well too. And then snowy owls, you can see here, often you'll see them on hydropoles. That's often where I will go experience them, or I kind of call them the pumpkins, the white pumpkins of winter, because you'll see them sitting on the ground as well too. This female though decided to pick a tree to sit in, and also in the Niagara region they will go to vineyards as well too, because there's some rodents around there too, and it gives them something to perch on, whereas up in where they nest and breed, they actually don't have much to sit on. It's usually mounds that they sit on, so they're actually quite comfortable even on the ground as well too. So you can see this male here, so you can see how they blend in with the snow, but you can, when your eye gets trained, you can kind of see how they pop out and how much a little easier they are to see. Of course, this is through a large lens, so it is making it a little bit easier to actually see the owl. But I find closer to sunset or early morning light or sunset, like I said, they tend to really pop. It's almost like a fluorescent color. And so that does tend to make them easier. It's almost like a light bulb sitting out in the field there. So when that takes place, then generally you will have, it will make it easier for you to see them. And they tend to be more active about an hour before sunset, or shortly after sunrise to maybe two hours after sunrise, depending on how much they've ate before, the day before as well too. Now they can be tricky to see in snow squalls, as this all white male shows you here. Very hard to see them, but again, overall you can generally pick them out. And then of course at times they're not happy with other snowy owls being in the area too. There's a competitive area near St. Catharines where basically you can have quite a cluster of owls, and this female is just not happy with the fact that there's another one about 7 hydropoles down from her, too close for her comfort. And you can see her even sizing me up. That's how they gauge distance. See that little head bob there? It's really neat on how they zero in. And then of course you have the male. This is a male way off in the distance. She was not concerned about him. He was probably about 700 meters away. It was this other lady that she was not happy with, and she was having no problem telling her that too. You can see, watch the head go up here, and then she screams at her, and she's just not happy. You can see it written all over her face. And I think that's one of the things we enjoy about owls so much, is the fact that you can see their expressions. And when you can see their expressions, it really gives you that connection of kind of picturing them like a little feathered human and she is just not happy. Where she threw me off here is I was basically thinking she was going to fly towards the other owl, but she actually came down right next to me about 15 feet away and flew around me, which was an incredible sight to see. And of course we have the eastern screech owl here. We're back to the tan morph. So I'm showing you a little bit of video. Now this is some action right there. You can actually see a little bit of a blink there. They are very, what I call, kind of sleepy, dozy birds, especially during the day. They become active in the night, but they generally do not do much. So just turning their head like that, that is an action shot to me, but you're actually going to get to see a neat clip. And I was grateful that I was rolling at the time. And so you can see here we've got the gray morph, and then we also have the tan morph here together. And it's neat to have both in the same tree cavity because it does give you a great view of both. And the gray morph is actually more dominant, as you will see here too. And both of them are sunning themselves here. The tan morph is more susceptible to the cold, so it was nice to see her getting more of the sun, and then the gray morph to the left there. But you can see now something's caught their eye, and what was actually happening was a red-tailed hawk was in a kettle, one of those thermals above, and was basically flying over. And you're going to get to see another look here in a moment where they basically notice it and then they quickly retreat back into their tree cavity. So after some time, they basically said, okay, we want more sunlight, so they slowly worked back out into the sun here. First came the gray morph, and I speeded up here so you can actually see a 5-minute process of them coming back out. Oh, there we go. The gray morph decides, yeah, I'm going to come out. But notice now the gray morph is not allowing the tan morph to come out. So it kind of shows you who's the boss. And so the tan morph is trying on the right side of your screen, then tries again on the left side. And you can see just how much sun that tan morph is getting, but doesn't seem to be too bugged by it. But that's the general idea. Eastern screech owls are very easy to walk by because of the fact of just how well they blend in with the trees and the bark around them. So that's why I've only seen about a half dozen, but I know I've walked by plenty in my time. I find February and March is the best time to see them sunning themselves in the distance, or in the trees, or in their cavity. And now we have the great horned owl, and they are generally, like I said, the best ones to find nesting, especially in areas where the woods are fragmented. This here is a great example of the male. The winds were out of the northeast. The male was on the southwest side of the tree protecting himself, whereas you got a feel for the female here. There she was in nicer weather, and then here she is basically covered in snow and covered in the elements. So female owls typically are bigger because they got to protect the eggs or protect the young, especially if unseasonably cool weather hits later in the season like March and April. And now you can see these little characters that have come from the nest here. These are two owlets, and they are basically staying very still because they don't want to draw attention to them, but to themselves from me. And eventually they left the nest, and you can see this one sitting very, very still and keeping a very close eye on me. And I speeded up here in a time lapse, so this looks a lot faster than it really is. But at this point, I'm actually walking a semicircle around it, and you can see that it was basically tracking me at that point. This was the male, and then off in the about 75 meters away was the female as well too. But you can see the youngster here just keeping an eye, and now it's starting to kind of become bored with me. And this is kind of what I like because it shows me that they're relaxed with me, so they start to become very tired. Now, of course, I do keep an eye on the adults because of the fact that the females can be quite aggressive when protecting the nest or their young. So that is one thing I advise you on, that you don't want to get too close. I generally allow them about 2 weeks before they start to actually, before I start to get closer or get my photos. So there you go, you can see the female in one tree, and then you'll be able to see the male in another. He was further away, the female was closer, so he's about 75 meters away and she was about 50, but they weren't really too concerned with me. And there's a great close look at the little thing. And that concludes Exploring the Birds of Ontario. I hope you really enjoyed it, and I know I enjoyed sharing it with you, and I look forward to exploring the birds of Ontario too in the future. It's already in the making.